First Things, episode number 32.
I seem to be lost.
And so you're working around the clock so you don't take time for yourself to feel like an actual human being.
I used to feel like no matter how hard I worked, I was just spinning my wheels.
Trying to be perfect, we try to have everything in place at one point in time, and we can't.
Hello, my friends. Welcome back to First Things, the podcast dedicated to practical productivity based on modern research. My name is Brandon Vaughn, and my goal is to help you apply productive solutions to your life to help you live with less stress, greater passion, and amazing results. Welcome back to the show. We are continuing our series on assertiveness, and this week we are in Chapter 2 of the Assertiveness Workbook, and this chapter is entitled Overcoming the Stress Barrier. Now we're going to talk a little bit about what that means and why that is important to this issue of assertiveness. But before we begin, I wanted to mention to you a couple of things, a couple of announcements before we get started. First thing is that I rarely recommend things on this show unless I really believe in them and gain great benefit from them. So a lot of the books that we're covering, there is a writing course for anyone who's interested in writing fictional books, things like that. I have a link to that on my webpage at firstthingsproductivity.com. An excellent course, one of the best ones I've seen about writing fiction. And it's a great course some of you would be interested in. But the big thing I wanted to mention is the Creative Live. Now, several weeks ago, I asked if you had interest in nominating me for consideration from one of their instructors to do so. And to date, I have not heard from them. And that's okay. You know, it may still happen. They may have interest. They may have lots of ideas that they're going through and already have a schedule of things that they're going to do. And they may contact me at some point in the future. So I wanted to thank all of you who did that, because I know several of you did, and you contacted me and told me that you did that. So thank you. I really appreciate that. And if it pays off, then awesome. If it doesn't, well, thank you. Thank you for at least considering that and doing that for me. But on their site right now, this week, and if you listen to me in real time, then you should listen to this episode on Friday, and they should still have this on sale. But anytime after that, it's a full course that you would have to pay for. Right now, it's actually free when I'm recording this particular episode. And if you listen to me on Friday, when I hope to release this episode, it still will be live and you can get it for a discounted course. But this is a course on body language and how your facial expressions, how your body all gives a message, and what that message is and how you can make even better messages from your facial expressions, from your body language, from your tone. And it is a fascinating course. And the thing I love so much about it is that it's based on research. It's based on academic research, and it's a phenomenal course. And I would highly recommend that you do that. I think right now, if you were to tune into this course and you are listening to me in real time, you could get the course for like $99. And then I think on Saturday and moving forward, then it bumps up to about $149. But I tell you, it is a tremendous course. I'm buying this course. You can go there to creativelive.com. You can search for the body language course. If you do buy it, I don't get any commission off of this. Just so you know, there's no affiliate links or anything like that. It's just a really great course. And if for some reason you can't afford the course, I imagine that I will be talking about some of those very things here in the assertiveness course. The reason why I mention this is because we will be talking about some of those issues of body language and different aspects of communication as part of assertiveness. It's definitely in there. I want to reach out to the lady who was doing the course and to see maybe if she might consider coming on to this show and talk about that specifically to my audience. I haven't reached out to her yet. Of course, she's doing the class out in Creative Live, which I think is up in Seattle, Washington, I believe. But it is a tremendous course. Definitely would recommend it, even at $150 if you missed out on the special. And they do regularly air some of their past episodes. So if you do miss the episode, there's a link on their site that talks about a calendar. It's a calendar of their courses, the new courses and old courses. And I would just keep checking back until they show it again, and you can watch it for free if you just catch it when they replay it. Definitely something I would highly, highly recommend. Another thing that I want to highly recommend to you is our good friend Timothy Moser, who was on the show a few weeks ago. Great friend and supporter of this podcast. Well, he's at it again. He has a brand new podcast that I think, and he thinks as well, will probably outdo his own productivity show. It is called Master of Memory. And you might remember, if you listened to that episode with Timothy, that I talked a little bit about this. I was fascinated by what he's doing and the tools and the techniques that he's using. Well, he has a new podcast called Master of Memory, and his website is up as well. Let me read the description of this podcast. He says, I'm Timothy, a lifelong learner. And he goes on to say, this show is basically about memorization, memory tactics, how to remember anything, have trouble remembering dates, vocabulary, people's names. This is where you're going to find these answers. What are the different types of techniques? I think he's even going to, at some point, possibly talk about learning languages, how to learn math formulas, all this kind of stuff like that. It's a great start. And already he's up to episode 8. He's just going to town on this. He's doing several episodes during the week. I don't think he's on a daily schedule. Maybe he is, because he's producing these out pretty regularly. I haven't talked to him in a while, but I would definitely encourage you to check out this show. It's a great podcast and definitely something that I think is worth your time to listen to, especially if you're interested in how to memorize things better. Great, great show. Which reminds me, at some point, I will do this in one of my episodes where maybe I'll devote a whole episode to it after we finish this particular series about some of the podcasts that I listen to and some of the ones that I get a lot of benefit out of. And I think some of you might find interest in some of these other podcasts. I listen to a wide variety of things, many things that sometimes may be music related or about creativity in general. And I think many people would find benefit from that, just not musicians. And they're not really geared necessarily to musicians, but maybe we'll talk about that at some point. I was talking to my good friend, Tori, and I think I mentioned Tori a few times on this show. I'm not sure if I've ever mentioned his name, and he listens to every single episode. And Tori, hi, just such a great friend, such a tremendously smart guy. And I hope to get him on this show because he loves listening to a lot of this. He remarks how similar we are. I think we're cosmically twins in some manner. We think a lot alike, even though we're different. We're came from very different backgrounds, but just a tremendous guy. And he listens to these podcasts, and then he'll shoot me questions or things that he's dealing with. And we were talking about this issue of choice again. And we talked about this. I talked to Tori about this back in the procrastination episode, and just, how we're both working through this idea of choice, because it's not something we were raised with. It's not something that we were taught. And many times when it comes to assertiveness, it is still kind of a blank area. We can easily see what it means to be passive, and very easy to see how it could be passive aggressive. And personally, I can really relate to a passive aggressive style sometimes. But what does assertive mean? Because you have a choice and you have that mutual respect for yourself and for others. And that can be quite foreign to many of us who aren't used to living that way, to think that way. How does it really work itself out? And this is the whole point of these shows, to really start digging into that with examples as we keep going forward in this. But it is a big, big issue. So if you still have questions on that, that's quite okay where we're at, because we're all working through this together. And when I'm going through this in my own life. You remember when we did the procrastination episode, I was talking about doing my music. And I was doing this primarily to be accountable to you guys and to also to experiment with my own life and to do this. It wasn't that I had all of my life neatly figured out in that area and I was the master, of overcoming procrastination. I'd applied it in many areas of my life with tremendous results, but there was this one area in my music where I wasn't using this. And so I decided, hey, I'm going to basically put into practice what I'm teaching. And that was the whole point of this. Well, I'm doing the same thing with this. There's many areas in my life where I know that I'm being assertive in, and there's other areas I'm not. I'm being maybe passive, or maybe I'm even being passive aggressive. I don't really deal so much with aggressiveness as much, but there's some areas I'm definitely putting this into life and trying to figure out, how does it look like here? I'm not quite sure what it looks like here, but this is part of the journey. This is part of the process that we're in, and this is where I'm at with you guys too. We're on this journey together, and we're learning to do this. Anyway, I wanted to mention Tori because I hope to bring him on a show. He has some really great insights into some things, and he was talking to me about some of that today, actually, and I definitely want to bring him in to let you hear some of that dialogue that sometimes we have. Many times we have these conversations, and I'm sitting there thinking, man, I wish I could tape this and put it on my show, because some of the stuff we get into and the stuff that we dig apart is really amazing to me. And again, it's not that we have all the answers. Many times all we have are questions. But I'm firmly convinced that we're never really ready for answers in life until we're asking the right questions. I don't know if you've ever seen this with people, that many times they'll come and ask you a question, and you know what they're about to ask you, so you go ahead and give them the answer to basically stop them and not waste your time. And many people, it's almost like they don't even hear you, because they're not even really receptive to receiving an answer until they ask the question. And I think many times for us, we give up too many times. And questions are really the color of life. We're always looking for the answer. What's the answer? What's the answer to life? And to me, the mystery of life, the color of life, the intensity of life is in asking the right questions. And they're asking in the right questions that maybe we don't even have the answers to yet. But the wonder of life, the adventure of life is found in questions. And so when you're asking questions about assertiveness, then don't feel bad about that, because that's a great thing if you're asking questions. If you're saying, I get this, but I don't see how it fits here, I don't quite, that's a wonderful place to be. And don't feel ashamed of that at all. Okay, so wow, I was a little chatty there. Not sure why. I'm just really talkative today. So let's get into chapter 2 of the Assertiveness Workbook, which is talking about overcoming the stress barrier. Now, what the author is doing in the next few chapters is he's basically talking about some of the obstacles that we have in our lives that keep us from being assertive, that keep us away from that. And one of these areas is stress. And if you think about this, many times the reason why we react in life passively or aggressively or passive-aggressive is because we're put under some sort of stress. Somebody in our family or in our job, our boss or something puts us under a lot of stress, and we react to life. And we go into this automated response to life. And it can become an identity to us. This is one of the things I was talking to Tori about as well, is this how everything seems to fall back around identity. Who are you and who do you say you are? I am blank. And whatever you fill in that blank is a tremendous insight into what freedom you have in your life or what things are binding you in your life, because your identity is a huge thing. Well, when we get under stress, that can really reveal our identity very, very good. You may be very convinced that assertiveness is a good thing and that it's much better than being passive or aggressive, or especially passive-aggressive, but everyone doesn't do it. And why is that? Well, one reason why is because of stress. Because we get under stressful situations and we automatically respond to certain situations. We kick back into things that we have based our identity on, and we just respond. And we never think about how we are responding and what our choice should be. It always comes back to choice, and many times we just respond, and we don't analyze what that choice is and whether or not it's a choice that we want to make. Stress is all about feeling threatened. You feel threatened by a certain circumstance or certain situation, and our instinct is either to, as you've heard many, many times, is to fight it or to flee, to fight or flight, you might remember. Do we fight this or do we run away from this? It's our survival instinct. And many times when we feel threatened by something, we will do one of those two things very typically. It will be kind of our automatic response. I will fight this, or I will run away from this, or I want to fight, but I fear the consequences of me fighting. Therefore, I will act as if I'm running away, but I will be fighting it in a very subtle, manipulative way, which is, again, our passive-aggressive response to life. These are all of our attempts to try to get past these stressful situations. Now, the author basically mentions several ways in which we respond to stress. He mentions it in a 3-step process. First of all, there is the situation itself. And this is the thing that introduces itself in my life that will want to stress me out. Then there is my appraisal of that. So I look at this situation. It's like a printout in my brain that I see or hear this situation, and then I analyze this and I appraise it. And I say, this is what this means. And then that leads to the 3rd stage, which is my response. After I've appraised it, then I choose what I'm going to do. And when you think about stress in your life, basically the way you handle stress is to go after one of those 3 stages. Either you go after the situation, or you go after your appraisal of the situation, or you may go after your response to that situation. So, for example, if you go after the situation itself, you may actually confront the person responsible. You may actually go after them in some way. Maybe that could be through assertiveness. Maybe it might be through aggression in some way, but you're going to actively deal or try to deal with that situation firsthand. Some people might reevaluate the appraisal of this. Does it necessarily mean what I think it means? I think they're saying this to me. Does that really mean what it was? Did they really mean it that way? Am I really a bad person because they said I was a bad person? Well, let me reappraise this because that's what I felt like when they told me that. Is that really the truth? And I go after that part of the stress. Some people deal with their response to it, which is maybe what they choose, or to try to change how their body reacts to that, maybe by going through some type of relaxation techniques to deal with the stress. And they do heavy breathing. And all of those have merit. They really do. Different aspects of it will help in different situations. Let me read this from the book itself. He says, as we have discussed, most of the pressures we face in the modern world are very different from those in the primitive world. Running away usually doesn't help very much. Neither does attacking people physically. Most of the time, these choices only make things worse. Instead, the best thing to do is usually to stay calm, think through your options, decide on a course of action, and then carry it out. To be assertive, we have to think about the words we are using and express ourselves without either shrinking away or becoming aggressive. This is precisely what the stress response prevents us from doing well. So your boss criticizes you, or a coworker or a family member criticizes something that you've done. Your reaction to that is going to depend on what you think this means, what identity you're going to derive from this, what things you're going to believe about this. It's your appraisal of this whole situation. Just being involved in a stressful situation doesn't mean that you will be stressed out. So, for example, if somebody criticizes you, but they don't tell you that they criticized you, then if you never know that, then there's no appraisal. You don't act stressed out. Your body doesn't respond in a stressful situation. In order for you to really appraise and respond to stress, you've got to be aware of it. And that means that your understanding of what's going on in that stressful moment is a huge thing. Your appraisal is a major component to dealing with stress. So if you believe that you're likely to lose your job, you may become very fearful. You are frightened, you're afraid, and you want to run. Many of us will do that. We will desire to escape. We'll avoid situations. We'll avoid conflict because we fear failure. We fear these types of things. We fear rejection. And something like that, for many of us, may induce a very passive manner. Now, if you're criticized for something, and maybe it's a coworker, an equal person to you, and they blamed you for something, and you really think they're wrong and you don't deserve something like that, you might actually become angry. And this might be the opposite side of the stress response, in which you don't flee from it, but now you fight it, and you get in there, and you may be tempted toward an aggressive style of communication. You might start speaking really loudly or in a very threatening mode. Your body language may appear very threatening in some way, and this is maybe your response to that. It's a different type of response to stress. Or with the passive aggressive, as we've said, you can be very angry, but then you might actually be afraid of what happens if you directly confront that situation. So then you start passively being aggressive. So maybe you avoid that person, but you tell bad stories about that person to other people, or you do certain things to make them look bad. As we said last week, all of these types of communication patterns aren't very good. They typically make situations worse the more you use them and the longer that you use them. And I hope you can see that all three of these communication styles are very much how most people handle stress. And we get into stressful situations and we really start gravitating toward usually one of these three styles instead of the assertiveness style. Because when the pressures of life are really pounding away at us, we go into this automatic mode again where we kind of gravitate back toward these three types of communication styles. The author goes into some different techniques for dealing with stress. So one of the ways that you can help yourself to establish assertiveness, and especially when you deal with stress, is to minimize stress as much as you can, especially as you're building up a new habit of assertiveness. So many of these techniques the author talks about are ones that we've all heard before. Many things, sometimes we've mentioned them in these podcasts as well, such as exercising. Exercising definitely helps you deal with stress. Research is showing this all over the place, that people who engage in some type of exercise, it doesn't matter what it is, just some type of exercise, basically have less stress, less anxiety than those who don't. Same thing with eating well. The more fast food and bad foods that you eat, then the less likely you're able to deal with stress in your life. Sleep is another thing like that. When I was talking to Timothy Moser a few weeks ago, I know that he experiments with sleep in his life quite a bit. Some very radical things that I am quite fascinated by. But when it all comes down to it, people need sleep. And I would love if I could live off of just 2 or 3 hours of sleep, but I can't. It just makes me feel terrible. I can usually function for the first 3 or 4 days. on very little sleep, but then I'm not very alert, I'm depressed, I'm down, I'm drowsy, I end up eating bad, I don't exercise. I mean, it's just a very bad thing. I don't handle stress very well. And for me, I need at least 7 hours of sleep, maybe even need more at times when I'm really stressed out. And I've learned not to fight it as much as I used to in the past, because in the past I would be so upset the fact I had to sleep, but it's just part of life. And you can either fight against something like that, or you can just live with that and work around it as best you can. You should also watch your caffeine intake as well. I mean, all these things he talks about in the book, again, are just common sense. He talks about leading a balanced life. And this is a big part of this podcast, is always talking about how do you lead a balanced life. And that's something that we definitely need part of our lives, that we put first things first in dealing with stress. But definitely a bigger part of this, well, I shouldn't say a bigger part. I mean, all this stuff is equally important, but the appraisal part, how you think about a situation, is an extremely important thing. And this, to me, is where a lot of assertiveness falls into, and especially with stressful situations. It's not so much about dealing with the situation. Sometimes, yes, we may have to deal with situations, but many times I think the battle is in the appraisal part of this, especially those of us who find ourselves gravitating more toward the passive side or even the passive-aggressive side. Usually the appraisal part is where we lose this battle so many times, because we take it as part of our identity. We start interpreting situations as maybe who we are as a person. And as the author mentioned in his book, Cognitive Behavioral Theory, all the research behind how we think and behave, says that we don't really react to what's going on around us. Instead, we react to what we think is going on around us. Sometimes we're right about our appraisal, but sometimes we're not. And we think this is true, and this is how we react in life, when it's not really the case. It's not really the truth about what's going on. I mean, you should ask yourself this question. Are you really 100% certain that the situation that you find yourself really means what you think it means? Does it really mean they don't like you? Are you 100% certain of that? Would you bet everything you own and all of the money in the world that that is really the case? Or would you say you're 99.9% sure? Well, if you're 99.9% sure, then it's not a given fact. And we have to face up to this. I mean, honestly, there's some things in my life I can look at, and if I'm honest, I would say it's a 99.9999999% chance, but I cannot honestly say it's 100%. I don't know what this other person is thinking. I may have 20 years of evidence of what this person thinks, but I can't get inside their head. I can't definitively say how they view me, how they view life, how any situation is what it is. I don't have all knowledge in situations. And I may feel like statistically that I can say I'm 95, 98% confident of something, but I cannot say I'm 100% confident of anything. And if that's the case, we need to be very careful about what we allow ourselves to think, and to just assume that whatever we're thinking is the truth. So if somebody says something to us and we say, that person hates me, well, that may be what we thought, but we cannot let our thoughts rule us without judging that and say, wait a minute, why am I thinking that? I don't have any evidence. Yeah, they really do act like they hate me, but do they? Maybe they're having problems in their life. Maybe their whole life is falling apart and I don't even know it. And I basically get the lash of that. And I'm interpreting that as if they hate me when actually they're hurting. See, I don't know. And so how many times have I just lived based upon what I thought was true and never questioned my thoughts? My second episode that I did, which is one of my more popular episodes, was something called Stinkin' Thinkin'. And how many times we don't really analyze our thoughts for what they are and realize the fact we're not going to be 100% right about how we appraise and derive meaning from the situations in our life. We got to be very careful about stuff like that. We need to examine really what we're thinking, and we need to examine it from another point of view. Is there any other possible explanation for this? And I do this quite a bit. I don't always like to do it, and sometimes it's a couple of days after something happens when I'll do this, but I will try to get into the other person's shoes and think, is there any other reason why they responded this way? Any other reason why this is happening? Is there any other possible explanation for this? And even if you don't do that, if you don't try to put yourself in the other person's shoes, you should still ask several relevant questions. And I love the questions that the author suggests that you ask yourself in a situation. So I'm in this particular situation and I feel very stressed out and I feel very threatened by something. Well, then ask myself a series of questions. For instance, is my life really in danger? Or does it just feel like it's in danger? And if you're honest, many times your life really isn't in danger. So there's no reason to run and there's no reason to fight so many times like we think we should, because your life really isn't in danger. Is this really worth a battle worth fighting? Is it really worth getting angry and exploding to a person? And so many times it's not. Your life isn't in danger. Or he says, will being tense help the situation? So I'm all tense, I'm all stressed out, I'm all anxious. Is that really helping? Is that really doing anything? Now, there are times when being tense is a good thing. I mean, if you're in a car accident and you're trying to get your family out of a car, or you're trying to get people out of a car that you stumbled, well, being tense in that type of situation is a good thing. You're aware of things and you're anxious and your adrenaline's pumping, but most of the time, the stress that we face in life, it's not helpful to be tense. There's no benefit from that at all. Or he says, what's the worst thing that could happen? And we've talked about this before in the episodes on procrastination. What is the worst thing that can happen? And what's the big deal? We get so stressed out about, oh, this is terrible, but we never really think through, well, what? What is the worst thing that can happen? You know, the old book that's still a really good classic, Don't Sweat the Small Stuff. And P.S., it's all small stuff. We get so bent out of shape that this is such a huge deal, that this is such a huge ordeal. And it's really not. You know, one of the most fascinating things I think that I've learned from listening to a lot of podcasts, especially the entrepreneurial type of podcasts, is how many of these people who are making major money today through their entrepreneurial lifestyles and businesses were people that got fired from their job or intentionally quit jobs that they had. And you think so many times that you get stressed out at a job and then you get fearful, oh, I may lose my job and what would happen to me? We basically always live, I have a theory at least, that we live by this fear of death. The fear of death is what drives so many of the other fears. So why do we fear losing our job? Well, we fear losing our job because then I lose my health insurance. And if I lose my health insurance, I can't go to the doctor. And if I get sick and I can't go to the doctor, then I die. Or I won't have money to feed my family. And because I don't have money to feed my family, then we can't get food. And if we can't get food, then we can't eat. And then if we can't eat, then we die. You know, it all boils down to this fear of death so many times. And you have to really ask yourself, what is the worst thing that could happen to you? And so many times, the worst thing isn't going to happen to you. Just because you lose your job doesn't mean there isn't other jobs that you can find. Doesn't mean there's not other ways that you can make money. I mean, there's some podcasts out there. I was listening to a podcast today by Pat Flynn, and Pat Flynn's one of these self-made entrepreneurial type of people that does this passive income. He was interviewing this couple, and this lady lost her job, and she didn't know what to do. And she basically started up this kind of business through eBay, and she was just not really making much money. And then all of a sudden, Amazon came along and started doing this fulfilled by Amazon. So this lady went about and she went to like clearance racks in like CVS or Walgreens or Target, all these types of stores, and would buy stuff that was on clearance, turn it around and send it to Amazon as part of her business, and then have people pay full price for this stuff that she had bought on clearance, and was basically making profits off of this, legitimately so, to the point that she replaced not only her salary, but her husband's salary as well. And all this happened because she lost her job. And you would think, oh my gosh, how can anybody ever make money off of that? I mean, you know, what's the worst that can happen? Many times I think that, you know, what's the worst that can happen? Oh, I lose my job. Well, maybe that's okay because maybe that means I have more time to do music. And I say, well, where am I ever going to make money off? Well, maybe I start making money off of music. Maybe I find time to actually write some books I wanted to write, and that sells. And then, you know, we worry about so much stuff. And we've got to quit worrying about stuff so much and to always expect the worst to happen. One of the exercises that the author encourages people to do is to do a 3-column form. And this 3-column form basically is literally that you write out 3 columns. You write out the situation in one column. You write out what you're thinking, your automatic thoughts in the second column. And then you list out what the truth is in the third column. You challenge those stinking thinking. You challenge those thoughts that were just automatic, basically what you had based your identity off of your whole life. So for instance, he gives this example. Frank asked me to serve on the office space allocation committee. Well, that unleashes a fury of thoughts. Well, he'll hate me if I say no. I'm not allowed to say no. He knows what an awful job it is. He asked because he hates me. He has no idea how much work I've already done. These are all the thoughts that you have bombarded in your brain. And sometimes we just leave unchecked and we just respond to those thoughts instead of challenging those thoughts. So he'll hate me if I say no. And I say, wait a minute. The truth is, he's entitled to feel what he feels. I can't make him like me or hate me, and it's not my place to do that. He's entitled to feel what he feels. Besides, he probably won't hate me. Let me take an optimistic view of this. He may hate me, but he probably won't. So let me give him some dignity to basically have his consequences for the choices that he has in life. That thought, I'm not allowed to say no, and instead say, wait a minute, I decide what I will and won't do. I'm not trapped into doing anything. I choose to do this. What about the thought, he knows what an awful job it is. He asked because he hates me. And I say, wait a minute, he's done some other things that suggest he likes me. Maybe he thinks this is an honor. Maybe he's already tried everyone else. Maybe he thinks I'm the best person for this job. See, I'm challenging my thoughts. I'm refusing to live in this bondage to my thinking. I'm refusing to live by only a passive communication style or an aggressive style or a passive-aggressive style. I'm not going to do this. Or what about the thought, he has no idea how much work I've already done? And I say, well, now, that may not be true. I challenge that thought. Maybe he does know, and he thinks he can rely on me to do it well. If I want him to know about my work, it's up to me to tell him. I've got to tell him and not just assume that he may know. Maybe he does know and really just believes in me, or maybe he doesn't know, and I've got to tell him about this. See, this is all about assertiveness, where I challenge my thoughts and force myself to have respect enough for myself to choose in that situation, and respect enough for the other person to not always see them in the most negative light and allow them to choose their own path as well. And what the author does at the end of the chapter, so he's talked about some things you can do to try to eliminate stress in your life, to reduce it by eating well and exercising. And the big secret in this whole thing is that we must challenge our thoughts. We cannot allow our thoughts to dominate us without us choosing what we're thinking or choosing what we do with those thoughts. We have to always have choice in there. We can't rob ourselves of the dignity of choice. But the other thing he talks about at the very end of the chapter is, what do you do if you're right in the middle of stress? And I mean, somebody just slams you in a meeting, criticizes you, yells at you, blames you for something. Your family does that. You're in some very stressful situation. Well, one of the chief things you've got to do in a situation like that is to back away from it. And this isn't the same thing as flight. Flight basically says you're getting away from it forever. If you're in a very stressful situation, it does help to remove yourself from that, just so you can get back in control of your thoughts and your emotions, to get back into that upper hand of being able to deal with this. You're going to still choose. You're going to choose what your action is. You're not flying away from it, fleeing from it, and avoiding it forever, that passive style. No, you're going to deal with it, but maybe right at this moment, when you're right in the middle of that stress, when someone basically has just demeaned you and ridiculed you and yelled at you, well, that's not probably the best time to make the choice. You want to calm your emotions down. You want to gain control of your thoughts, to see exactly what you're thinking, and to appraise that. You need to probably remove yourself from that situation. Go for a walk, take a break, go home, do something, take a nap, sleep on it. Just avoid the person maybe for that day, and then come back to it the next day. Take a break from this. I encountered this not too recently in a particular situation that I was involved in a group helping them out. And this group was totally stressed out, and they were working 7 days a week on a particular project, not taking time off. And 3 people in this particular place, in this particular side of the business, quit. Very important people. And it was because they were stressed out. They couldn't handle the pressure any longer. They couldn't get away from it. And I told one of them specifically, you need to take some time off. You need to get away from this. You need to take a vacation. You need to do something to see this from a different perspective. I've been in situations like that where you can't get away from the person. It's like they're everywhere and there's no place to go. Well, let me tell you one place you can go, the bathroom. I'm telling you, it works. I've been into situations where it's like I could not get away from a person and they were always around me. Well, if you go into the bathroom and go into a stall, I know that may be crude. You don't have to do anything while you're in the bathroom. You can just get away, just to get away and breathe, or just go outside and go for a walk. Do something, but get away and get away from this this need to be impulsive, to do something right there at the moment, to say the first thing that comes to your mind. That is often the worst thing you can do. You need to really calmly choose exactly what you're going to say, what you're going to do, to analyze and appraise your thinking. And many times getting away will do wonders. Going for a walk, exercising is a great thing. When you have this kind of fight mentality in dealing with stress, or even the flee mentality, your body's wanting to do something. You're wanting to do something. So why not do something? Get out and take a walk. Go and exercise for a little bit. Do something that will burn off some of that nervous energy, some of that response from your body to do something. Well, do that instead. Or just go off somewhere and breathe. There's been many times, and I'm not big necessarily into meditation. Some people might. But there's many times when I've been in very stressful situations, and I've mentioned this in past episodes, I will go outside and often go for a walk. Sometimes I will go out, especially if the wind is blowing really nicely. I go out and just close my eyes and breathe and feel me inhaling and exhaling my breath, just feeling that and feeling the wind blow against me. And that's, I guess, some form of meditation. And that helps. It helps me calm down and to respond to a situation. I think for many of the listeners who are listening to me that deal with a very aggressive style, these are things that you should try to put into practice, because many people who deal with aggression often want to just respond right away, and they lash out at situations in which they feel threatened. Many of the passive people that may be listening to me, if that's your style of communication, you also respond very instantly, but your response is to distance yourself and to pull away. Well, that to me sometimes is easier to solve, because if you do pull away, you can always re-engage. But if you are aggressive to people, sometimes you will burn bridges really fast. And so I think it's important that both styles of communication learn to better deal with stress, but getting away from the stress momentarily, I think is a good technique to use, as long as the passive people don't avoid the situation forever. You're pulling away to regain control of your emotions and to reassess the situation before you do choose how you will respond. But as long as you're choosing to respond, that's the key to assertiveness. An aggressive style of communications, if you aggressively deal with people in certain ways, you should practice more and more pulling away to calm your emotions down to where you can more proactively deal with people. Well, I hope that helps today. That's going to wrap up this episode of the stress barrier as an obstacle for us to be assertive. And I hope it helps some. Next week, we are going to be talking about overcoming the social barrier. So many of us fear failure and especially rejection. And that can really drive some of those communication styles like passive or aggressive. And we've got to overcome that as well if we're going to fully embrace being assertive. So if you have any questions for me, you can leave me a comment at firstthingsproductivity.com/32. Leave me a comment. You can leave me a voicemail free of charge on there. You can find me on Twitter, find me on Facebook. As I mentioned in the last episode, I hope you will consider this almost like a class you're taking on assertiveness. If you have questions about it, if you're not sure about something or what I meant by something, or you want me to explain something in a little bit more detail, then let me know. I'd be happy to talk about it here on the show or talk about it on any of the media that you actually contact me on. As always, please consider leaving me a rating, whether that be on Stitcher, iTunes, whatever the case may be that you're listening to me. Obviously, if you're listening to me on my website, thank you very much for that. There's no way to leave me ratings there because you're listening basically directly to the source itself. I do thank you for that greatly. But if you do listen to me on something like iTunes, I would love if you consider leaving me a rating as well. So until next time, remember this. You can choose in life. You don't have to let stinking thinking control your life. You can appraise your thoughts and you can choose actions for your life. Don't take away that capability that you have. It may not feel like you have that. Your emotions may be screaming at you to the point you feel you have no choice, but you always do have a choice. It just may not feel like it at the moment. And if you feel that way, back away from the situation. Give yourself a little bit of a distance or gap to where you can really know you do have a choice. And when you realize you have a choice, then engage back in life and make sure you deal with those situations. Do not devalue the importance you play in this world, no matter what. Embrace today with passion and intention, and don't die with your music still inside you.